Hello, welcome back to my stream. I hope everyone's having or had a good day, depending where you're from and how much of the day you've had. But yeah, I hope it's going well for you. So today, in the UK, we're going to start off with some news that the Maya Forstater appeal has actually finished and it's actually been upheld. So she's won her appeal, which means, well, in brief terms, it means there's going to have to be a redo of the employment tribunal. But in terms of what it means in the wider context, we'll go over that. So, because at first read or glance, I think it's a natural feeling, especially as someone trans. It's like, oh, this is definitely concerning. Is gender critical, or are gender critical beliefs being, that's accepted that trans people can be discriminated against. But let's read through and see what the outcome actually is. So, a woman who lost her job after saying that people cannot change their biological sex has won an appeal against an employment tribunal. Maya Forstater, 47, did not have her contract renewed after posting tweets on gender recognition. She lost her original case at a tribunal in 2019, but a High Court judge ruled her gender-critical beliefs fell under the Equality Act. So this is relating to the appeal. So the original tribunal, which I suspect this is going to go into, basically said that the belief of that a man can't become a woman can't become a man, and it's absolute. They are the two absolute points in sex. There is no in between, and that is what she views. The science backs up. And she was arguing that should be a protected philosophical belief. Not that, from my understanding, so in the original, it was said that she was potentially harming people with those views, misgendering people. I think it was said that she wrote. I think I went through her report. She wrote whilst in employment there, and I believe she sent it to fellow colleagues. And it was a big long article on basically sex and gender, and that sex is real type thing. But to be fair, going over it briefly on stream, it didn't seem. Hey, yeah. Welcome. Just going over the news today of Maya Forstater winning her appeal. Just doing a quick summary of what happened in 2019 with basically, I was rambling, but the judge determined that her gender critical beliefs weren't worthy of respect in a modern society. And that was due to the fact that a belief has to meet 5 criteria, and her beliefs met 4 of them, but it failed on the 5th. And I did go over all of this in a previous video, so I'm not going to go all over it now, but basically it failed on the 5th, and the 5th is it can't then cause harm or sort of tread on another protected characteristic group's rights. And at that time, that judge determined that that was causing harm to trans people, because she was so absolutist in her view that sex is binary and she must refer to people by their sex assigned at birth. Now, what I did find unclear is whether she was actually doing that. I don't know. But that's what was said. And so she then lost that, because basically she was saying that she'd been unfairly dismissed from I think it was a think tank. And because even though technically her contract wasn't renewed, you often see in a lot of these articles that it's to be fair, the BBC have actually said that, but they often see that the articles say she lost her job. Now, she didn't lose her job, but in law, I think that unfair dismissal also covers not renewing a contract. So she does have a sort of an initial valid legal basis in 2019, and that was a fair thing to do. But that was what was determined, that it didn't meet the criteria for a protected belief, so therefore it wasn't. It's ironic, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very narrow way of thinking. You know what? I need to get a little background for that, don't I? So that the white shows up better. What I'll do for now is just, there we go. Still not going to look great, is it? I don't know how that looks on stream. I'll faff around with this later, but yeah. So exactly, I think some of us might agree that it's somewhat narrow way of thinking for someone working in a think tank, and it's quite a funny comment. I like that. But yes, so she has those beliefs, and they didn't renew it because they thought that was detrimental to the workplace, and fellow colleagues complained, and that's how it got to that situation in the first place. She thought it was unfair dismissal. The judge didn't agree because he didn't think it was a protected belief. That sort of sums it up. So then she appealed the fact that it wasn't determined a protected belief. Nothing actually to do with the sort of whether it was unfair dismissal. This appeal was purely around whether holding gender critical beliefs is a protected philosophical belief under the Equality Act. So that's an important distinction to make, because this is purely about whether she's allowed to hold beliefs. So I'll read more of the article. So the appeal said the tribunal had erred in law and another should take place. So that's talking about the actual employment tribunal determining whether or not she'd been unfairly dismissed. Miss Forstater from St Albans in Hertfordshire did not have her contract renewed at the think tank Centre for Global Development in March 2019 after posting a series of tweets questioning government plans, which were later scrapped, to let people declare their own gender. So that's self-ID, is often what that's referred to. She claimed she was discriminated against because of her beliefs, which include that sex is immutable and not to be conflated with gender identity. In the initial tribunal employment judge, shouldn't that be a comma there? Anyway, in the initial tribunal employment trial, Judge James Taylor said her approach was not worthy of respect in a democratic society. So that's what I was talking about, not meeting the fifth criteria of a protected philosophical belief, because it caused harm to trans people in his interpretation of the law. He concluded that Miss Forstater was absolutist in her view and said she was not entitled to ignore the rights of a transgender person and the enormous pain that can be caused by misgendering. However, but the Honourable Mr Justice Chowdhury, and I apologise if I'm mispronouncing that, said her gender-critical beliefs did fall under the Equalities Act as they did not seek to destroy the rights of trans persons. Which is interesting, because, yeah, you can cut that all sorts of ways, can't you? I mean, if you're purely talking about whether she's allowed to hold a belief, well, I think anyone should be able to hold any belief. I don't think we should be thought policing people, but I think as soon as you start expressing those beliefs, that's the point at which you can be held accountable for them. Just holding a belief, that's I think it's a slippery slope if you tell people they can't, you're not allowed to think that. So where are we? So so Miss Forstater said she was delighted to have been vindicated, but this is CGD which is the think tank that didn't renew her contract, said the decision was a step backwards for inclusivity and equality for all. In a video statement, Ms. Forstater said, "I'm proud of the role I've played in clarifying the law and encouraging more people to speak up." Amanda Glassman, Executive Vice President of the CGD, said, "The decision is disappointing and surprising because we believe Judge Taylor got it right when he found this type of offensive speech causes harm to trans people and therefore could not be protected under the Equality Act. Today's decision is a step backwards for inclusivity and equality for all." My Forstater won her case because the Employment Appeal Tribunal concluded that her belief that biological sex is real. See, this is what really frustrates me and a lot of other people, because this is a bit of a straw man that often gets shouted about, and no one, or at least very few, it's a minority, is arguing that sex isn't real. I've not come across that. That's why this phrase is very frustrating. But anyway, that biological sex is real, important, and immutable met the legal test of a genuine and important philosophical position that is protected under the UK's equality law. The test for such a protection was that her belief touched on an important part of human life, would be accepted by others and, this is the important bit, could not be shown to be a direct attempt to harm others. So this seems to be where it differs from the original ruling, because in the original ruling it's just whether it's sort of impinging or causing harm to another protected group, whereas this is sort of saying it has to be a direct attempt to harm others. Which again, the onus is to prove that that's what she's doing, and I don't know enough. I haven't seen enough of the evidence to know whether that is it. However, I'll go on to some other articles to pick some quotes from her. I think is a defence lawyer, and the problem is that this appeal is going to get conflated with the whole discussions around the Gender Recognition Act reform, but we'll get on to that. The appeal panel found that while her words were offensive to some, they fell far short of the violent and oppressive views of Nazism or totalitarian. There was not any evidence that she had harassed anyone at work, so that's important. So if she hasn't been harassing people, but that is important, because she can hold those views, but if she's not being abusive to other people, then however much we might not like it, and it's uncomfortable, which sucks, for me too, right? Like, that would suck working with someone like that. But equally, I'd hope you could engage in this very much depends on the person. But I've had people where I work where I've actually had some good conversations where perhaps that they might not have quite seen sex and gender in the same way as I view it, and you might see them as, oh, they're possibly transphobic or they're bigoted, when actually a lot of the time it's just people might have concerns because they've just don't really know much about trans issues, and so it sounds odd to them. But if you can then engage in a good discussion with them and it remains sort of friendly, that's fine. It's as soon as it breaks down into abuse or, in the case against trans people, purposefully misgendering, because that's not respecting. Everything should be based on respect. You don't have to believe in makes it sound like it's it's just a sort of a here nor there, but you don't have to be on board, I guess, with trans issues and believing that a trans woman is a woman. As much as I would love you to, you don't have to respect a trans person and call them by their preferred pronouns. By doing that, you're not suddenly declaring that you're completely on board and you're yeah, that's it. I'm fully behind you. Again, would love you to be, but that's not the case. All you're doing is showing respect. And I think that's just a basic thing that can be done for anyone. That doesn't impinge on an individual's rights just by using someone else's preferred pronouns. But then it gets more complicated in terms of single-sex spaces. But again, we'll get onto that. So where does this leave employees? Equality in employment law requires them to recognise and uphold the rights of all in the workplace. Miss Forstater's speech and beliefs are protected, but so are the rights of trans people. And if speech crosses the line from an honestly held belief to bullying, attacks and intimidation, then the scales very obviously tip in the favour of protecting the victim. So that's key. Now, I believe this is actually said, and yeah, here we go. So Mr. Justice Chowdhury acknowledged that some transgender people would be disappointed by this judgment, but said it had not expressed any view on the merits of either side of the transgender debate. Again, but when it's phrased as a transgender debate, like, I get it because it's sex and gender is so intertwined into our society and how we see it, and we're going through a more focused period. It's more visible with those ideas changing. But when it's phrased as a transgender debate, it makes it feel like let's debate people's identities, and it's like people's identities are their identities. What really we're debating are the concepts of sex and gender and how they map onto our lives in society, and the protections or whatever safeguards we believe we have need to have in place to protect the rights of some, etc. It sort of feels not necessarily it's just about trans people. It's just our view on sex and gender. But anyway, the judgment does not mean that those with gender critical beliefs can misgender trans people with impunity, he added. And he said it does not mean that employers and service providers will not be able to provide a safe environment for trans persons. So again, this is really key that this has actually been put in the judgment, because again, this judgment is purely about whether it's okay for someone to hold gender critical beliefs, just to hold them, not start going around and spouting them in the workplace or misgendering people. That's not what it's protecting. That's not what this ruling's on. So that's a very important thing. The problem is, which I'll get onto again, is that this, of course, is going to be taken by anti-trans people as a massive win in that way, when actually it's not. This is very focused on whether or not it is a protected philosophical belief and whether it's okay for them to hold it, and so therefore can't be dismissed just by holding that belief. So it would classify potentially as unfair dismissal, but that's what the employment tribunal that will be re-held, I guess, and will determine if it was purely down to that, then that was unfair. But if there are other reasons, then maybe it was fair. Okay, so CGD said it was considering various paths forward with its lawyers, and said it disputed Miss Forstater's version of events. So again, we're not going to learn more about that until that happens. The sole issue considered by the appeal tribunal was whether the original tribunal had been wrong not to consider Miss Forstater's views as a philosophical belief protected by the Equality Act. So yeah, that's what I was just saying. Other matters of the case, such as her employment status or whether she was discriminated against, would have to be decided at a fresh tribunal. Yeah. Okay, and this is why I made the previous video, because the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission stepped in and made comments on this, because they actually stepped into this appeal on Forstater's behalf. So they are actually defending her position. which at first, again, sounds alarming because, they're for equality and human rights. Trans people should be protected. But she says exactly what I said. It's that there's a difference between holding a belief and how it's expressed. That they are very different. We're not thought police. And in a civilized society, we should be able to have differing views and opinions without fear of losing your job, etc. The issues come with how you express those views, and that can be done in numerous ways, right? So that's a problem. So this is purely about the right to hold a belief, and so therefore, because it's protected, holding that belief, you can't dismiss someone for it in a work context. She said, some may see the beliefs of others as questionable or controversial, but people must be free to hold them. This is why the case is so important. Monica Kranatask, I have butchered that name, I apologise. I'm just not even going to try. Employment partner at a law firm Baker McKenzie said the ruling meant that individuals are entitled not to be discriminated against because of gender critical beliefs, and gives those beliefs the same legal protection as religious beliefs, environmental beliefs, and ethical veganism. So, which again makes sense, right? I mean, I don't agree with a lot of religious beliefs, but that doesn't mean I believe that just for holding those beliefs, someone should be, fired from work. Again, it's their actions. If they start preaching to me or other people in the workplace and harassing, that's then an issue. So, and I guess the difficulty comes as to what do where is that line? What is the line of harassment and going too far? And, because of things like Twitter, she got into trouble because of tweets. So is that harassment, or is that just airing her thoughts? Because people should be free to air their thoughts, but though, back on that, J.K. Rowling type thing, well, people are equally allowed to then respond and criticise the thoughts that you air in public. In a polite manner, I will add. On either side, it's never good, never cool to be vitriolic or spew hatred towards anyone, because all it does is just polarize people. It doesn't bring people sort of closer together for a decent discussion. I mean, there are potentially limits. I mean, if someone is literally advocating for your death, then that's probably a limit there. But right, where did we get to? Got there. Employers will be watching closely for any guidance on how to handle employee conflict fairly and lawfully while respecting the rights of all involved. Laurie Asquith, Director of Legal and Policy at Mermaids, a charity that supports transgender, non-binary and gender-diverse children and young people, said, "This is not the win anti-trans campaigners will suggest in the coming days. We, as trans people, are protected by equality law, and this decision in the Mayor Forstater case does not give anyone the right to unlawfully harass, intimidate, abuse or discriminate against us because we are trans." Exactly. So that's what I've just said. So they can hold a belief, but it doesn't really change anything. You can hold that belief, great, and that it's important that people can't just be fired offhand for that. But if you then start expressing them in a detrimental way to others, that's a problem, and that's where there will be repercussions. That makes sense. Ms. Forstater's case gained public attention, including some high-profile supporters such as J.K. Rowling and Jonathan Ross. Okay, not really sure why that is relevant. Okay, so like that. To be fair, this article isn't too bad. Like, it seems fairly fair. I think this is the key thing. What I said, and then Mermaids have put out, that this is going to be probably used for a little bit as ammunition against trans people in the discussions around Gender Recognition Act reform and access to single-sex spaces. And this comes back to holding a belief versus expressing a belief. So, or how you express that belief, I should say, because it's not just expression, it's how you express. Because this on its own, like, to me, that this actually makes sense, and I think I agree with the logic and my somewhat limited understanding of the law. It does make sense. The problem is what carries on from it and what the interpretation is off the back of it. So I think one example will be if we just go to somewhere that isn't traditionally trans friendly. So let's see, let's just scan through this. So same, yep. So this is all very similar. So what I'm looking for, does this have extra information? Reacting to the landmark judgment this evening, Ms. Forstater said she was incredibly proud and insisted the ruling will protect women's rights in the workplace. Okay, so that's the first thing there. What does that mean? What women's rights is that protect? I mean, I would argue you could say it's protecting everyone's rights to hold a belief, even if it is in conflict with others. I think that's a fair thing to say. But why is it, this is a very sort of anti-trans comment to make. What else? Yeah, so this was that. Yeah, that's the same before. That's the same as the BBC article. Yep. Oh, so these are some of the tweets. She wrote, What I am so surprised at is that smart people who I admire are tying themselves in knots to avoid saying the truth, that men cannot change into women. Again, I think a lot of this, and I think I said this in my previous video, comes from the conflation of sex and gender. Sex and gender are conflated all the time, and I'm not aware of anyone who's saying, and not that I need to be aware of everyone, but it will be a absolute minority who are saying that sex isn't real. And in terms of changing sex, well, sex is actually a hell of a lot more complicated. I mean, I do not know anywhere near enough, and I'd love to learn even more. But it's not as simple as you are male or you are female. I mean, just as an example, there was this article in the Scientific American, which was someone trying to visualize sex and sort of how it all fitted together with how sex is influenced. I can't remember who this person. Oh yeah, researcher. Where is it? The project was originally conceived as a data-driven graphic exploring the spectrum of sex and gender. Hired a researcher to look into these questions. Okay, so it was a researcher who looked into these and then came back with these points, and then I think they took it to an artist or someone to create a visual representation of it. And so got expert advice on it. So this is just one interpretation, but this is an interpretation of sex. And you can see over here you've got the typically biological female, and over here you've got typical biological male. But you can see all these things in between that affect where you sort of lie. It's not just whether you're XX or XY. You've got the SRY gene, which is important because that determines whether or not the words ovaries develop into testes, I believe. But you can still have, I think you can have women who actually have they have XX, but they wait, let's get this right around. They have XY, sorry. So they chromosomes wise, they're male, but they don't for some reason the SRY gene is missing. And so the ovaries don't then change into testes, which means they then develop as female, assuming everything else is, which is, as you can see, it's way more complicated, and I'm simplifying this probably horribly. But my point is that it's you could have a woman who actually has chromosomes of what is thought to be male. So the whole argument of, well, you can't change your chromosomes or you can't change your sex. Okay, well, currently we might not be able to change chromosomes with technology, but it might not actually be what you think lines up with what you think male and female are anyway. And then beyond that, you've got secondary sex characteristics, which are heavily influenced by hormones. And hormones definitely can be changed. I mean, that's what I'm doing. That's what medically transitioning is for some people. It's going on hormones and changing that balance. Everyone has a mix of, to some extent, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. So whether you're male or female, but the levels will be different, and that's different for everyone. And you have typical ranges, but you'll have quite a variation within those ranges as well. So some women might have, might be right at the top of the range of testosterone in them, whereas other women might be right at the bottom. And same for men and levels of estrogen. So it's really interesting. Like, those can change, and sort of the question becomes is how do you define sex, and what point do you sort of draw that line to say, right, at this point, this is what a female is and this is what a male is. And these are the discussions that we should be having. The problem is, me included, nowhere near an expert on it. And it's, really these are the discussions that the experts are having and trying to progress. And we're getting these bits and pieces that come out and trying to make sense of them. But like it is not as simple as the often taught in lower school, that you have males and you have females and that is it, and you're one or the other. So even sex isn't as simple, because sometimes people can be confused. I think people are much more familiar with gender as a spectrum these days, but sex, perhaps that's still quite a new concept, perhaps, to say that is perhaps more of a spectrum. And when I say spectrum, I think it would be bimodal, in that you would have two peaks. So if this was a graph, you'd have starting down near the bottom, and then as you get to the typical biological female, you get a peak, and then it comes back down, and then you go through that, and then it comes back, and then as you go towards the typical biological male, you get another peak, and then it goes down again. But that means you have, the majority of people are in those two middle points, but there's people in between, and there's people on the outskirts. So, are they male? Are they female? The people in the middle? And are the people on the edges, are they sort of like ultra female or ultra male? Like, and at the end of the day, I think some people have issue with the term, what is it? It's a social construct, that sex is a social construct. Because you straight away think about, well, no, but my body physically exists. It's there. Anyone can observe someone's body and see it, and it has a state, and you can see that at any given point in time. But the thing is as you often find looking in nature, there is no binary though. There's not like this, one or the other. As you can see from this diagram, there's loads of possible things that can interact and cause differences and fluctuations in development of sexual characteristics. So what is a social construct is, well, where do we draw the line? And sex is what we call this, group of, physical features, or features perhaps isn't the right word, but attributes and your makeup, your biological makeup. But we label it as sex, but then we come up with where those divisions are. And that is a social construct. Yes, the underlying matter always exists. That saying something is a social construct doesn't mean it doesn't exist, which I think is where some people fall down. It's not saying sex doesn't exist. It's just saying that the concept of sex, we have developed that as a society, and there is no absolute to our best understanding. And again, this is what this graph or this diagram demonstrates. Where do you draw the line? And that is what we as a society try to determine, and that's what science tries to help us out, and philosophy. It's all really, really interesting, and these are discussions that would be awesome to be having. Imagine if these were discussions that you have with people. It would be really, really interesting. But alas, that's not what happens, unfortunately. So anyway, we massively deviated. But yeah, sex is not simple. It is much more complicated than it's given credit for, and often talks about in the mainstream, or I should say mainstream media. And I don't know if the whole, sex is real phrase coming from anti-trans people, or at least gender critical people, comes from the fact that people say that maybe this is it. Maybe they hear that people say that sex is a social construct and go, no, well, what? It's not a social construct. It's a material thing you can observe. But it's, well, who's determining where that line is between male and female? Us. We're determining that. There's not some sort of objective thing in nature that has a flag saying, yep, I'm female. We have constructed that. So and all of these things are, it's like gravity. Gravity is it comes through science, but gravity is just something we use to describe an effect in the world, or something we observe in the world around us and in the universe. That effect exists no matter what we call it. But gravity is a theory in science. That's something fairly concrete, not just an idea, a theory. But it's still something that we have constructed to describe something that we observe in nature. So again, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that's a really important thing to, and yeah, there's plenty of people online that probably could explain that a lot better than me. But anyway, that was a quick go for that. So the other thing, I was looking for more stuff off the back of this, wasn't I? That was it. So here we go. Reacting to her victory on Unheard. Where have I heard of that before? That rings a bell. Is this for people who feel like they're being silenced? I think that's what that's for. Miss Forstater explained, the thing that we pleaded was that my belief is that sex is real, biological, immutable, and that sex matters. Okay, so agree that sex is real in that it's describing, biological features. Yeah. Immutable, I think, is open for discussion. Though I'm not claiming that I can, suddenly give birth to children, but then it's, anyway, that's another rabbit hole. And I'm not saying that we can change chromosomes at all. It's just the concept of sex is evolving and it's complicated. It's not just that it's a scientific fact. So again, what science are you basing this on? But also that it's a social and political and economic salient important thing. So it's not that everyone can have their own rules, but everyone can have their own beliefs. Yeah, so that's true. Everyone can have their own beliefs. That's completely true. What I realised I missed this. So, and sex matters. So I think the question as a society we have to ask is, why does sex matter? Why does it actually matter? Now, in the context of sort of medical treatment, so healthcare, yeah, between me and my doctor, my sex, my genetic makeup, and hormone levels, etc. That is important information, and that's for me and my doctor to discuss as to how different medications might affect me differently because of my biological makeup. But why is that important to anyone else? What difference does that make to anyone else? Why are we so obsessed? And I think a lot of this, which understandably comes from the fear that it opens women up in single-sex spaces to potential abuse. Now, as a first thought, it makes complete sense. That's a rational worry to have, given how society is structured. We're all over the place. Males and females, men and women, gender-wise, are divided. So toilets are a perfect example. But does that actually have to be the case? Because at the moment, regardless of whether someone's going to try and claim to be trans, a man or a male can just walk straight into a women's bathroom and, unfortunately, be a horrific human being. And there are laws to then, process that and punish that person in an appropriate way. But does that mean we should be segregating because there are a few that, are deviant to societal norms? And this is a really sensitive topic, obviously, because it's not just about that. It's easy to say that, oh, well, those people will be punished. But, well, that victim has then had a horrendous experience. And, aren't you forgetting about that person? They're scarred for life. That's trauma. That's horrific for them. And you wouldn't wish anyone to go through that. But unfortunately, as it stands, someone could just walk into a bathroom and do that. So I'm not sure what this segregation is actually achieving, other than to enforce that and entrench that sort of fear of the opposite sex. Because, most people, either sexes, are good people, that they mean well. And it starts to get quite complicated, because if the argument often in trans people is that, well, you're putting women at risk, and this is always about trans women rather than trans men, but if you allow trans women into women's bathrooms, then that's putting cis women at risk. But the question to me is where does that risk come from? Where is that risk? What is the source of that fear? Is it that they are inherently stronger, and so, statistically are more likely to be able to overpower someone and attack them, which is a valid concern? But if that's the case, then, well, as I said earlier, right, sex is actually, not just a binary, and cis women come in all shapes and sizes. So does a large, strong woman also pose that threat? Because, might be a surprise, but cis women can be bi or lesbian. So is that then an issue? Now, in my world, no, because that's not the problem. By discriminating against an entire group to try and solve an underlying issue, it's just a plaster. There's other things you need to try and tackle there with why people commit these crimes in the first place, and what can we do to try and prevent them? What can we do better in education? How can we make sure people are better protected and have, if the worst does happen, how can we get someone there to help as soon as possible? Surveillance type thing. That has other issues though about privacy, especially in a bathroom. But these are discussions I think are quite interesting to have, because where do you draw that line? Who is a threat and who isn't a threat? And if you start excluding some people, well, who else would you exclude? And this, I believe, and please, if anyone's watching and this isn't true, correct me if I'm wrong. In Canada, originally they did pass a bathroom bill, but what it led to was actually some cis women being challenged about whether they were really women. And so it led to, discrimination. It actually led to worse outcomes because people were starting to judge people purely by their appearance as to whether or not they were a true woman. And so it caused more sort of fear and mistrust. And that's the irony of it. It's segregation. I can't think of a good example, and I'm no historian. So again, it'd be interesting to discuss it and go through it. But I can't think of an example where segregation has actually been a really, really good thing in the long run. For me, segregation by sex seems to lead to just further mistrust of the opposite sex. Now, the problem is that, as in the UK actually has been on the news today, and I think over the past week, that sort of sexual misconduct towards women and young girls has almost become commonplace even among children and adolescents, which is horrifying if that's true. But based on a study by what's the name of the school overseers, Ofsted, that's it. I think they're the ones that did it. Ofsted sexual harassment. There we go. That's what I was looking for. It's something like is it 90% of girls said they either had or knew someone who'd been sexually harassed or been sent unwanted naked pictures and things like this. And that is horrendous. But shouldn't we be trying to address the causes of these things rather than sort of trying to stop it, the issue once it reaches that critical crescendo just before, someone's about to actually commit a horrible act? Shouldn't we be trying to tackle these things much earlier on and try and understand how people get into those situations in the first place, to both obviously protect the victim, but also to try and help these people who end up doing these things? I think it's quite interesting, and maybe part of it is it that there just needs to be more open discussion about sex, because in society it often is a taboo thing to talk about. Is it that, especially with the online age, children are able to read more about this stuff themselves? A lot of parents don't necessarily know what their children are doing online. And so if they're not having open discussions with their parents, or schools aren't teaching them about it, then they might well be trying to discover stuff themselves, as children do when they grow up, but they're also reading things online. And some of those could be good influences, some of them could be bad. And this is where I'm for better sex education for children, like younger children as well. I think, why is there such a taboo around it? Let's, as with pretty much everything in life, better education leads to better outcomes. And I think you could, I'm not saying this is a single fix all, but I do feel like there's other things we could focus on rather than just segregating groups because there's risks that, well, someone might commit a crime. It's a blanket approach for the minority. And at the end of the day, going back to the whole trans bathroom quotes issue, there's no evidence that this actually is an issue. It's a hypothetical. And in the UK at least, trans people have been going into the bathroom matching their gender identity for at least the last decade and much longer, but absolutely under the protection of the Equality Act 2010. And there's been no reported increase of sexual harassment or crimes related to that. So where does this fear come from? Because it's not actually from the evidence. And to me, it seems to partly come just from that fear that is entrenched in segregation. But there is also and it does also come from the fear of having experienced sexual harassment or sexual abuse, potentially. Like J.K. Rowling is an example of that. That's horrendous what she went through, right? And that's, again, understandable why she has fear around, from her point of view, again, I emphasize from her point of view, letting biological men into women's spaces. You can understand where that fear is coming from. But again, that's let's try and address those things at the source, not right at the end, by excluding a group of a minority group for the acts of a few people who may not even be in that group. It's all really complicated, and there's some really good discussions to have, but unfortunately a lot of the time it just gets polarized and it goes one way or the other, and if you're not with us, you're against us. And this is true of a lot of things. And I mean, Brexit was a great example of that. Anyway, okay, let's just quick. I think I've rambled enough about this. So what I was interested about is basically, should we be concerned with the fact that this appeal was won? Is what really we want to know. And what I would say is the actual ruling itself is absolutely fine. There's nothing to be worried about in terms of someone should be able to hold gender critical beliefs. Yep, that's. I think that's just a decent thing. Anyone should be able to hold any belief they wish. However, that's all this is about. It's not about anything else. It's just about the ability to hold a belief. So from that point of view, yeah, nothing to worry about. Where my concern comes from is, I believe, if we go, so that was her tweets. Yeah, this. Ben Cooper QC, representing Ms. Forstater at the Virtual Employment Appeal Tribunal today, said her views are based on fundamental scientific facts. Mr. Cooper said she claims ignoring them or pretending they are not true is detrimental to an honest, just and fair society, particularly upholding the rights of women. So, again, I'm not aware of someone ignoring scientific facts. This just speaks to the whole sex is real thing. These beliefs do not involve any moral judgment and do not deny the rights or status of transgender people or their protection from discrimination. So it does once it starts preventing trans people from accessing those spaces, right? That is discrimination. I'm concerned that children and young people are being encouraged to make these decisions at an early age and are being led to believe it is possible to change sex or simply to be a member of the opposite sex. Okay, so now we're massively diverting from this conclusion. Like, this is nothing related to the appeal. So, I mean, this is the classic concern around whether or not children, are old enough and have enough self-awareness, understanding, to make decisions about whether or not they are trans or whatever. But it's not just that. It sounds like they're concerned that people are being led to believe that you can change sex. Now, I'm not aware anyone's teaching that you can. Well, I don't know what people are teaching, but I'd be surprised, and it would be wrong if people are literally saying, yeah, you can literally change sex, because the definition of sex is open for discussion still, I'd argue. Like, for example, that might sound weird, but what definition are you talking about? Are you talking about a biological definition of sex, or are you talking about a legal definition of sex? Because if we go back to the original ruling, then the reason he ruled that as it was proper in a civil or a democratic society was because someone in the current law can legally change their sex. That's in law. That's the Gender Recognition Act as it stands. I mean, it's a horrendous process to go through, but when you do get a gender recognition certificate, you then are changing your sex legally. So the law then recognised you as that sex. So legally, you have changed sex. Now, that is another discussion to have, as to the conflation of gender and sex in the law and what is appropriate. But to then deny that, so if someone actually has a GRC but you still refuse to accept it, well, you're actually refusing to accept law. So I think that's where partly the original ruling came from. And then in terms of biological sex, well, again, what do you mean by biological sex? Because a lot of the time biological sex is just XX or XY is often what people say, but as we talked about, it's a lot more complicated than that. And you've got secondary sex characteristics that can be changed. Say, I have breasts. I wasn't born with breasts. I didn't. Unfortunately, I went through a male puberty and I didn't develop them then, but I have them now. So does that count as partly changing? It's changing my secondary sex characteristics, but it's not changing my chromosomes. It's not changing them, absolutely. But I have changed my hormone levels. But equally, I'm not suddenly growing a uterus or anything. So it's complicated. That's all I'm trying to say. There is no definitive answer. It's an interesting field. Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah, she accepts that trans people should be protected from discrimination. Mr. Cooper said that Miss Forstater will use a person's preferred pronouns in most social situations, but where it is relevant, she believes it is important to be able to refer to someone's biological sex. Okay, so what does she mean by this? Because in what situation is it relevant for anyone other than me and my doctor? For someone to address me with the wrong pronouns? I can't think of one. So I'm imagining it would be, the single-sex space argument again, and toilets and prisons and shelters. But why does anyone outside of me and a doctor, and perhaps then, I think for a shelter, I'm not even sure they would necessarily need to, because wouldn't the same logic just apply for, into a women's shelter? Wouldn't the same logic apply for someone who's, a cis woman who's bi or lesbian? That the same safeguards should be in place, right? So it shouldn't really matter. That you should just have all these safeguards in place regardless. And again, I've talked about this before. Trans people have been accepted into these shelters, and they are supportive. These places are supporters of this, and they haven't had any reported issues. So again, I'm open to discussion, but I'm not convinced what the importance of sex is there. Same with prisons. It's that in all of this, it's no black and white. It's grey, and there has to be some sort of. Sometimes there is a bit of a case by case basis of, okay, well this particular case maybe we need to treat differently, but shouldn't that be then down to those individual organisations or situations to determine the best outcome? But the default is to be inclusive. Okay, because that just concerns me what that really means. It's like, what situations is it important to do so? The lawyer continued, the claimant's belief is that being transgender is a different category of thing from sex. Category of thing. So being trans is just that your gender identity doesn't align with your sex assigned at birth. They are different things, but they are connected. So, okay, I'm not quite sure what that's arguing. I mean, is that arguing that gender is a different thing from sex? Then, yes, okay. Yeah, gender is a different thing from sex. But is that the discussion we should actually be having? Should we be actually segregating on gender? Because actually we tend to use gender more than sex in our distinctions in society. I mean, if you go out and you see someone, how are you, judging isn't the right word, but how are you assessing whether they're male or female, a man or a woman? Are you literally going, I wonder whether they have a penis, I wonder whether they have a vagina, I wonder whether they have chromosomes? Because those things you can't see. So I don't think anyone on the whole wonders that. Generally, it's just someone's gender expression, so how they present themselves. Clothing, makeup, etc., accessories, hair, how they walk, mannerisms, all that stuff. That's generally what people use to determine whether someone is a man or a woman. And when someone falls outside of those societal expectations or that person's expectations, that's when someone, can be unsure, which can happen to everyone, right? Everyone can be unsure, and that's then the polite thing is just, if you're unsure, is just to ask, like, what are your preferred pronouns? How would you like to be addressed? I'm not aware that anyone's going around checking for someone's chromosomes and whether or not they've got the SRY gene and whether or not they've got the correct level of hormones for testosterone for men and estrogen for women, and whether that falls in the expected range, or what if it falls outside? Would they then not consider someone a woman who, is visibly gender expression a woman? So it's interesting. Is that almost alluding to that? Yeah, actually, sex perhaps isn't the right thing to be segregating people on. But then even if you go on that and you say that people tend to do it by gender, you can then go down the route of, well, again, back to my argument of, well, what is the advantage of segregation? Why do we even need to segregate by even gender? Because I'd argue that is actually what we do. Legally, it is sex, and I think, to be fair, this is where some of these arguments are coming from. And this is why the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act need tidying up and bringing into modern times, because understanding has changed, terminology has changed, and it just causes more confusion. But yeah, maybe we don't even need gender. Maybe the only thing that matters is between a doctor and a patient what their biological makeup is, which is their sex, but it only matters there. just an idea. And some people might find that confusing in that, well, that if you get rid of gender, like, doesn't that get rid of trans people? Well, it gets rid of the concept of trans people as a social construct, but I would still exist. Trans people would still exist. It's just there'll be no need for that label because we are just people. We're just us. There's, it'll just be, we're a range of people and people are different. Some people are more feminine. See, I did it there. I used gender. We're so ingrained in it. It's so ingrained that would we get to a society where we don't sort of put people in these categories and actually that anyone's free to be however. But that's then interesting as well because, well, what about gender identity, which is that component, that seems to sort of be inside that, for me, triggered gender dysphoria and, made me very uncomfortable as a man. And so where does that come from? And that's, again, I want more research on that. Is there a biological component to that? Or is that driven just by societal expectations? It's really interesting. Okay, let's finish this. There's anything else here? I think that's it. So yeah, in summary, this I don't think is a problem. I don't think it's terribly surprising either. Someone should be able to hold whatever beliefs they want. It's how they express it, and the concern here is then off the back of this, is this going to be conflated with the GRA reform? Not that it's necessarily going forwards at the moment, because obviously it was all scrapped, but any possible future reform, and the general public will see this and go, oh, okay, so as part of that, people were trying to say that sex isn't real, and all these arguments which are frustrating because it's simplifying and strawmanning the discussion. So some concern about where this could go, but the decision in of and itself, I can't speak English, in and of itself, I don't think is a issue, and I think it's actually a good thing that anyone should be able to hold any belief. That's very important to society. It's how you express it. And let's not read the comments on this page. Anyway, I think that's it.